The day my CEO told me, "You won't be missed," he made the biggest mistake of his career. That line has replayed in my head so many times it's practically become a soundtrack. I wasn't just any employee. I was the company's director of risk and compliance, the one person paid to see the disasters before they hit. But apparently, according to my boss, CEO Lucas Harrow, I was also deadweight, overly cautious, and his favorite, the kind of guy who slows innovation with spreadsheets. Lucas liked to introduce himself as a visionary. Everyone else in the building called him the Hurricane. He blew in with force, made a mess, then insisted the destruction was intentional. And me. I was the unfortunate soul assigned to sweep behind him, make sure the board didn't implode, and keep the SEC from circling. At first, we worked well enough together. I admired his confidence. He admired my ability to keep his more unhinged ideas from becoming lawsuits. It wasn't a friendship, but we respected the roles we played. Then came the quarter he needed magic, growth he hadn't earned, profits that didn't exist, projections that looked like fairy tales with good lighting. When I refused to massage the numbers, his tone changed. Overnight I went from crucial team member to roadblock. The weeks that followed were a calculated squeeze. Meetings I should have been in happened without me. Files disappeared from shared drives. My direct reports were reassigned. Lucas stopped speaking to me entirely unless it was to issue a warning dressed as a suggestion. Still, I kept doing my job. Someone had to. Then came the exit interview, mandatory only because the board required them for senior leadership departures. I had submitted my resignation after Lucas made it clear my future wasn't welcome. I imagined the interview being routine, a polite handshake, some corporate jargon, maybe a feedback form. But Lucas insisted on conducting it himself. He sat behind his glass desk, grinning like this was a performance for an invisible audience. "Let's make this quick," he said, leaning back as though he owned the air in the room. "Just know this, you won't be missed." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they hurt, but because they confirmed something I'd been sensing in my bones. Something was wrong. Something bigger than his ego. Because for the last month, every time Lucas locked himself in his office, the company's financials shifted in ways that didn't add up. And the board, the very people he thought worshipped him, had started asking me unusual questions. I walked out of that room feeling strangely calm. Lucas thought I was leaving quietly. He had no idea what was coming. The first red flag appeared long before Lucas told me I wouldn't be missed. And looking back, it should have set every alarm bell ringing. It started with the closed-door meetings. Lucas had always been theatrical. He liked to be seen making big decisions, but suddenly he was disappearing into his office with new people. Guys I'd never met. Guys who didn't wear badges, who didn't sign in at reception, who avoided eye contact like they owed the building money. They carried sleek black briefcases and left without a trace in our visitor logs. Whenever I walked by, Lucas's voice would drop to a whisper. And when I asked who they were, he'd wave me off with a smirk. "Vendors," he said once. "Consultants," another time. "Friends," another. 3 answers. Same men. Lucas had always had favorites, but this was different. Overnight, a junior analyst named Kevin, bright kid, but rough around the edges, was suddenly invited to meetings with investors and senior staff. Lucas praised him endlessly. "Kevin has what it takes. Kevin gets it. Kevin isn't afraid to take risks." Translation: Kevin didn't question him. I caught Kevin in the break room once, pale and jittery like he'd seen something he shouldn't have. "You good?" I asked. He froze, then whispered, "You didn't hear it from me, but he's asking me to sign things I shouldn't be signing." He swallowed hard. "And if I say no?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They shifted. Quietly but noticeably. A revenue dip here, an expense reclassification there, forecasts that suddenly ballooned without any explanation. Entries appeared without a trail, no approvals, no documentation, no audit history. Like money was moving in the walls. It made my stomach knot. I brought it up to Lucas. He laughed. Actually laughed. "You worry too much. God, no wonder your department is a drag." He dismissed me with a wave, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Something sharp. Something scared. He cut my budget in half. No warning. No discussion. Overnight, my entire team's tools, software, and training were reconsidered. My people, some of the best compliance professionals in the industry, were suddenly being told their work was extra. Extra. In a public company, it felt like someone was tightening a rope around my neck. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd already started losing sleep. Nights were a rotation of spreadsheets, unanswered emails, and the creeping suspicion that if I didn't keep digging, something catastrophic would hit us. Or worse, had already started. And through all of this, the same question whispered at the back of my mind. Why was the CEO suddenly so afraid of being questioned? I didn't know it yet, but those red flags were only the beginning. The betrayal didn't hit me all at once. It arrived in pieces, like shards of glass scattered across the floor, until one sharp realization cut deep enough to draw blood. It happened the week before my resignation, though I didn't understand the full weight of it until later. The board's audit committee had requested my department's quarterly risk assessment, a routine document I'd been preparing for weeks. I sent the draft to Lucas for executive review, just like always. He didn't respond. 2 days passed. Then 3. When I finally pinged him, he replied with a single-line email. Already submitted. Good work. I froze. Already submitted? I hadn't finalized the report. I hadn't even written the conclusion. There was no way he could have sent it in without altering something. My heart thudded as I rushed to the shared drive. My draft was gone, replaced with a new file stamped with Lucas's digital signature, listing me as the author. And the content. It was a lie. Revenue projections inflated by 28%. Compliance flags erased. Risk indicators resolved even though we had pending investigations. It read like a fantasy version of the company. Clean, stable, profitable. A version investors would love. A version the regulators would tear apart. I felt sick. Actually nauseous. Lucas had forged my report. My name. My work. And then he sent it to the board. That was the betrayal. Not personal, professional, strategic, surgical. He was going to pin everything on me. I remember gripping the edges of my desk until my knuckles whitened. Rage pulsed through me like a dull electric current. Heartbreak, too. I had built my entire career on integrity, on being the one person in the company who didn't look away. And Lucas used that against me. Used me as a shield. I stormed into his office, ready to explode. The door was cracked open just enough for me to hear his voice. He was on a call. No, the board won't question it, he said. A pause. Then a laugh that chilled me. Yes, he's resigning. Perfect timing. Honestly. The report looks clean, his name's on it. If anything comes back, well, he won't be missed. My breath stopped. There it was. The plan. He wasn't just pushing me out, he was setting me up as the fall guy for whatever rotten mess he'd buried under those doctored financials. Something big enough that he needed a scapegoat before it surfaced. And I had just found myself cast in the lead role. I stepped back from the door, pulse thundering, vision blurring around the edges. He thought he'd boxed me in. That I'd walk away quietly. That I'd never risk my reputation to expose him. But Lucas made one fatal miscalculation. He forgot what happens when you corner someone whose entire career has been about uncovering the truth. And I was done being quiet. Part 4 was already writing itself. I didn't remember walking back to my office. One moment I was outside Lucas's door, hearing him talk about me like I was disposable scrap metal, and the next I was sitting at my desk, staring at the forged report on my screen. My report, twisted into a weapon aimed directly at my reputation. For a while, I felt nothing. Just numb. That's what betrayal does. It hollows you out. Leaves you too stunned to be angry. Too hurt to even cry. I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the office, the tapping keyboards, the distant laughter from the marketing team, the rattle of the ancient fax system. A normal afternoon in a company that had no idea what was brewing inside its walls. A normal afternoon in a company where the CEO had decided I was the perfect patsy. My chest tightened. I'd worked too hard to build a name synonymous with integrity. I'd sacrificed weekends, birthdays, vacations, all because I believed in doing things the right way. In being the safety net. The guardrail. And Lucas. He used that devotion to bury his own fraud. At first, the heartbreak came in waves. How could he? How had I missed the signs? Why did he choose me? But then something shifted. Because underneath all that hurt, something else was stirring. Something fiercer, older, forged from every late-night audit I'd ever survived. It happened when I opened the report again. I zoomed in on one of the altered financial tables, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I could recognize Lucas's editing patterns anywhere. The sloppy rounding, the inconsistencies, the casual confidence of someone who didn't think he'd ever be checked. And then it clicked. He was sloppy because he believed no one would double-check it. Because he expected me gone and forgotten. Because the board trusted the clean numbers too much to look deeper. He didn't fear me. He underestimated me. And that, oddly, unexpectedly, was the trigger. A heat unfurled in my chest. Not panic this time. Not despair. Determination. Slow, steady, unshakable. I straightened in my chair. Wiped my palms against my slacks. Breathing steadied. Heart slowed. The room around me sharpened into focus. I wasn't done here. Not even close. If Lucas wanted to make me the fall guy, he'd just inspired the worst possible outcome for himself. I was going to fight back. Not with rage, though plenty of that simmered beneath the surface. Not with reckless retaliation, but with precision. With documentation. With the truth. Because someone like Lucas only thrived in shadows. And I was about to drag every one of his secrets into the light. The exit interview may have marked the end of my employment. But my report. That was going to be the beginning of his downfall. I made a list. Not a dramatic manifesto, just a cold, methodical checklist, the kind only someone who spent years cataloging risk could love. I duplicated everything. The original draft of my risk assessment, older versions, email threads, metadata, every footprint Lucas could have left. I did it quietly, copying files to an encrypted drive and printing hard copies I slid into a locked drawer at a friend's house. Paper can't be remotely deleted. Who in the building swallowed Lucas's stories without question? Who benefited from the altered books? I made a diagram, executives, investors, the mysterious visitors, Kevin, and a handful of junior staff who might be coerced. Names, motives, touchpoints, connections that suggested more than coincidence. I created an audit trail Lucas couldn't erase. Small, innocuous flags in the system that I knew would ping if anyone altered the archived files again. If he tried to scrub his fingerprints, the system would scream, an automated email to my personal account, a log entry with timestamps he couldn't rewrite without leaving trails. I reached out to 2 former colleagues who'd left on good terms and 1 current board member who'd always respected my work. Not to rant, but to ask one simple thing, verify. They didn't answer to me, they answered to facts. I fed them a redacted copy of the discrepancies and asked for independent eyes. Their questions would be harder for Lucas to brush off. Kevin was shaky. I gave him options, protection, legal counsel contacts, and a safe path to tell the truth. I let him see that if he cooperated, he'd avoid being collateral. If he didn't, the traps I set would make his silence an active choice. You don't expose a predator in private. You orchestrate a public stage. I planned to present the evidence to the audit committee the moment they convened for a routine review, when the board's attention would be on numbers, not personalities. It would be surgical, factual, impossible to ignore. All the while, Lucas strutted through the halls like a man with a crown bolted to his head. He started flying to investor meetings, smiling for glossy photos, dropping charismatic soundbites. Every public move reinforced his control. He still spoke of me as a closed chapter. That arrogance was dangerous for him, and useful for me. Every step felt like threading a needle under a marching band. If I moved too fast, he'd notice and shred the threads. If I moved too slow, he'd bury the evidence deeper. So I moved like I always had in crisis. Quietly, precisely, and with the patience of someone who knew the cost of mistakes. The day of the audit committee was 4 days away. I turned my back on the office window and stared at the list on my desk. Names circled. Timestamps highlighted. The tripwires armed. Lucas believed he had insulated himself. He didn't know my final step. The morning of the audit committee review felt unnervingly calm. Too calm. The kind of calm you feel right before a storm snaps the sky open. I walked into the boardroom with a slim folder tucked under my arm. Nothing dramatic. Nothing flashy. Just documents. Dates. Metadata. The truth compressed into paper and ink. Lucas was already there. He lounged at the head of the table like he was posing for a magazine cover. Suit perfect, smile polished. When he spotted me, his eyebrows lifted in mild amusement. "I thought you were finished here," he said, voice dripping arrogance. "I'm here for the committee review," I replied evenly. He smirked. "Right. One last hurrah before you fade out." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He was minutes away from realizing exactly how wrong he was. The board members filed in. Casual chatter. Coffee cups clinking. The mood was relaxed, because none of them knew what sat inside the folder in my hands. The meeting began with Lucas presenting his fantasy financials, the doctored projections, the fabricated stability, the growth that didn't exist. He spoke with confidence, sliding through lies like they were well-rehearsed choreography. Then came the formal request. "Director of Risk and Compliance, your supporting assessment." I stood. The room settled. I placed 2 folders on the table. One labeled, Submitted Report. The other, Original Report, unaltered. Lucas's smirk twitched. I began calmly, professionally, the way I had rehearsed. There appear to be discrepancies between the report submitted under my name and the actual data my department produced. Significant discrepancies. I passed both folders to the nearest board member. Silence fell as pages flipped. Eyes narrowed. Pens stopped mid-click. The deeper they read, the colder the room became. Then the questions came. Hard, rapid, surgical. Why are key risk indicators missing? Who adjusted these projections? This signature timestamp doesn't match the document creation date. Why does the metadata show revision from your login, Mr. Harrow? Lucas tried to interrupt, babbling excuses, blaming junior analysts, system glitches, miscommunication. But I had prepared for every angle. I produced the audit logs, the change history, the automated tripwire alert that showed the exact moment Lucas overwrote my file, the smoking gun. And then, I slid forward the final document. An internal memo addressed to him from the mysterious consultants. A memo outlining the intended cover-up. Lucas went pale. One board member leaned back and exhaled sharply. Another closed her folder slowly, deliberately. "Mr. Harrow," she said, voice cold as marble, "please step outside while we deliberate." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw not arrogance, not disdain, but fear. Real, unfiltered fear. He stood, stumbled slightly, and left the room. 30 minutes later, security escorted him out of the building. He didn't look back. The board members turned to me. "Thank you," one said quietly. "You've done this company a great service." But I wasn't thinking about gratitude. I was thinking of the moment he'd said, "You won't be missed." And how wrong he had been. Because the moment the doors closed behind Lucas Harrow, the board opened my exit report. And everything collapsed exactly the way he never saw coming. Lucas Harrow's fall was fast, but the aftermath was slower, quieter, and far more devastating for him than any public scandal could have been. The board didn't just remove him, they stripped him. His email access, cut. His executive privileges, revoked. His golden parachute, frozen pending investigation. Within 48 hours, the SEC had opened an inquiry based on the discrepancies in the doctored report. The consultants he'd been working with turned out to be part of a shell group tied to off-book transactions. I had suspected. Now the board had proof. And the best part. Every signature the fraud was built on bore his digital fingerprints. Not mine. Kevin came clean, too, tearfully, shamefully, but truthfully. With my help, he'd gotten proper legal counsel. The board granted him protection. His testimony lined up perfectly with the timeline I had documented. Lucas tried blaming him anyway. It didn't work. As the investigation deepened, the illusion Lucas built around himself crumbled. Investors demanded answers. Journalists camped outside his condo. Stock analysts dissected his growth miracle like vultures at a carcass. He disappeared from the public eye within a week. And me. I expected to leave quietly after the committee meeting. My resignation was still effective, and honestly, I planned to sleep for a week straight. But instead, the board asked for a private meeting. "We reviewed your exit report," the chairwoman said. "It's thorough, invaluable. Quite frankly, it's the only reason this company still has a future." They offered me my job back. And a promotion. And 3 months paid leave to recover from the undue strain caused by executive misconduct. I declined the promotion, but I accepted the leave. For the first time in years, I felt air in my lungs that didn't taste like stress. I wasn't just free. I was respected. More importantly, I was right. Weeks later, I read a brief update. Lucas had been formally charged with securities fraud and obstruction. The article quoted an unnamed board member. His downfall began with one report he tried to bury. I closed my laptop, sat back, and let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. He had tried to erase me. He had said I wouldn't be missed. But in the end, the one report he forged became the one that destroyed him. Poetic justice doesn't whisper, it signs its name in ink. And if you're watching this and thinking, "Yep, I've had a Lucas in my life," tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story, your betrayal, your revenge, your win. If you enjoyed this series, hit that like button, subscribe for more wild true style stories, and turn on notifications. Because next week, we're diving into another betrayal that someone definitely wishes had stayed buried.